Hello and welcome to the Emergency Services Times podcast, where you can hear the speakers who joined us on stage at the Emergency Services Show 2024. Emergency Services Network, future mission critical communications today. Delivering large, complex technology programs is notoriously hard to do. Simon Parr is leading the ESN program, which will update the way that the blue lights communicate with each other and across the varied terrain of Great Britain. Simon talks about the impact it's having now and in the future.
Simon, thank you very much for being with us. If you can start by just laying the land for us, what is the ESN and what stage is it at?
How long have we got? Okay, what is ESN? It is, in one sense, exactly as you've said, it is the replacement system for airwave. So it will provide critical voice to all our emergency services across England, Wales and Scotland. It will also work with our partners in Border Force and other places. There are a number of user organisations and share organisations, and they will get that critical voice. The other thing, of course, they will get is data. So they will get data as part of this. Because we are piggybacking on the back of a commercial network, you get both. So there will be opportunities over time to think perhaps a little bit differently about how that data is exploited. But in a nutshell, we will replace airwave with ESN to give that critical voice over the next few years or so. And that's going to take a while because it's incredibly complex. There are over 100 organisations, 300,000 users, 45,000 vehicles, dozens of aircraft. All of that needs to be connected up. Control rooms need to be sort of changed up. So in terms of where the programme is, one of the reasons for being delighted to be here, apart from the opportunity to talk a bit about the programme in general, is that we are at a tipping point for the first time in many years in the programme, possibly ever, that we are about to sign contracts for the two main lots, as they're called, to continue to provide the network and then to provide the rest of the infrastructure, sort of the ground-based infrastructure, devices, and most importantly, in that other piece of commercial business, the integration to knit all those different pieces together. We anticipate having those contracts signed over the next few weeks, trying to get them going before Christmas if we can, if not immediately after Christmas. And then we will work with users and our partner suppliers to build an integrated program plan that will allow us to actually start building for the first time, if you like, across the whole of the program for about 3 or 4 years. And so that's really exciting for us.
I want to come back to those integrations in a bit. First of all, you mentioned these 100 plus organisations you're working with. There's the obvious police, fire, ambulance, then there's all the other partner agencies that come into this. How much of a problem has that been, developing this programme, this project? Have any organisations been particularly challenging to work with?
No more than you would expect, bearing in mind that the single most important piece of equipment, in my experience as a cop that I ever had, was the radio. People want to make sure it works. And in the end, despite all the technology and all the commercial challenges that there have been and will no doubt continue to be in something of this complexity, this programme is about trust. It's simply about trust. And people who've heard me talk about this before will know that I've used this example a lot. But 3 o'clock in the morning in the rain, in the dark, wearing gloves, our blue light colleagues, Coast Guard, Mountain Rescue, anyone who uses one of these devices needs to trust that it will work where they expect it to work. So no one has been particularly difficult. I'm not saying people haven't been difficult, but I would expect them to be. I would expect the representatives of my former colleagues and people in here in this part of the building, your current colleagues, I would expect you to be absolutely as challenging as I would be to make sure that it works and it's safe and it's reliable.
How can you ensure that?
The testing programme will be enormous. So we've already done a lot of testing to look at coverage to make sure that the handheld coverage is where we expect it to be. That's never going to be everywhere, in the same way as airwave isn't everywhere. And in the same way as I'm aged myself, the old UHF handsets and the VHF sets in the car weren't everywhere. The challenge is to make sure that we can have them where we know they're needed now and that people can rely on them. There will always be places where there are not spots, just as there are now. So that is always going to be the case. But the trick with the programme is to test and test So the push-to-talk application that will go into the push-to-talk devices, we've got to make sure that that works, that it does what people need it to do when they need it. And the only way to do that is to create a partnership between us, the user organisations, blue light colleagues, and the suppliers. And where there is a problem, we sit down and say, well, that's your fault. It isn't going to work. The way you fix it is you sit down and you say, how do we make this work? And you kind of have the contracts over there, you have the roles and responsibilities over there, and you sit down and you put yourself in the place of a paramedic and say, well, will she take this? Is she prepared to accept it? And if she isn't, we're going to fix it.
Talk to us about the infrastructure that you've had to develop behind the scenes. Have you had to start whacking up huge, great masts up and down the country?
Well, our partner in delivering masts is BTE, and they have put up a large number, hundreds of masts at the moment. So there are ones that we're kind of attaching our kit to, which are the existing commercial masts. There are ones that are coming as part of the shared rural network, which is part of a government-wide drive to increase capacity. And then there are others that have been funded by the programme that are what's called extended area services. And there are masts going up now around the country in places where no commercial supplier would put them because there is no commercial benefit to them and it wouldn't work for them. But the programme via government is funding those. So yes, there are hundreds of masts going up and they're already being used. A number of those are live. There are something like 600 to 700 999 calls being made by the public on the ESN network that would not be made absent those masts. So there is a benefit already. It's a small one, but it is life-saving in some of those cases. So that extended network is beginning to have its effect.
It would be remiss of me to not ask you about the cost of this. This cannot be a cheap project. This is taxpayers' money for public service organisations. Is it being as efficient as it should be?
If you're asking me, has all the money that has been spent provided value, the answer is, of course, no. This programme is now roughly 10 years old, and whilst it's about two-thirds complete, we are still running two systems. We're building one and paying for another one live. So is that good use of taxpayers' money? Of course not. But one of the things that we are trying to do is to ensure that while we do continue and finish this build, we finish it as quickly as possible. So we're paying for a network that is cheaper, can be future-proofed, and actually works, and we get ourselves onto the future network as quickly as possible.
On those two systems, I remember the nervousness when Airwave was switched on, especially myself and my cops who policed in rural patches. We knew that the VHF was there as a fail-safe for a good year or so before it completely disappeared. We had that reassurance behind us. When ESN is switched on and active, how long will there be a backstop, a safety net running for?
We're looking for at least 6 months, probably longer. That will depend to a certain extent on how well the testing goes, how well the rollout goes. There is no point in running two systems if we are very, very confident. The reverse of that is that if I'm not confident, I'm not going to ask anyone to turn Airwave off on their individual handset, let alone on a corporate or nationwide level. And the promise I've given to the blue light services is they will never have the opportunity to say no to ESN, because I'll never ask them to take it until I would have used it, or my cops when I was a chief constable, I would not have accepted it in my old world. So there will be some double running. I don't know how long we'll run it for. It will depend on confidence, and to a certain extent it might depend on how small the tail is, in terms of have we got one or two small organisations at the end and we just need to go 3 months after that. The rollout period itself is going to last a number of years because we've got to get it right. As you said, there are over 100 control rooms to upgrade. There are possibly close to 400,000 devices of one sort or another that we're going to need to deploy and get into vehicles or aircrafts or into sort of patrol offices somewhere. So that's going to take a while. So we'll know an awful lot when we get towards the end of the final rollout about how reliable, how confident, how much trust there is. And that, to a certain extent, will inform how long we need Airwave for.
Many people in the audience may be serving frontline blue light staff. Talk to us about the device that they will have in their hand or their vehicle. Do we know who's providing those devices yet?
No, we don't know yet. We think there'll probably be a catalogue of about 6 devices of different types. Some of them will look almost exactly like the mobile phones that we carry. They will be for non-frontline people, but they will still be ESN capable, so they'll benefit from the network. Others will be going to vehicles. There will be others that we've called in the past ruggedized mobile phones, and I think that's the wrong phrase. They will be push-to-talk ruggedized devices because you can drop them, you can throw them, you can drop them underwater. You can do all sorts of things with them. There are some that we've looked at where you can take the battery out and it will retain its settings for an hour if you're struggling to get another battery at some point. So there's all sorts of pieces like that we'll be taking into consideration. The one that everyone talks about, of course, is that ruggedized device, because that's the one that people will rely on most of the time if they're in a really risky situation. It will have a touchscreen, but that doesn't mean that if you're soaking wet in the dark wearing gloves, you've got to use the touchscreen to communicate. And I don't mean to sound flippant at all, but the clue is definitely in the title. It's a push-to-talk application. There will be buttons that will actually make the connection exactly in the same way as people do it now. It's a different network. The device will do much more. Actually, I say a little more. It'll do much more because you'll have the data capability, and there will be other applications that can go on it. But at its heart, it's a rugged push-to-talk device that when you push, you can talk to somebody, and if you need help, you can find the button. That will make the call, and you'll get help.
Talk to us a bit more about that, because I think there's a concern amongst some serving frontline staff that there's all this excitement about the ability to send data, visual data, text data. Just because you can do something, it doesn't mean you should. And as you said earlier on, when you were a cop, certainly when I was a cop, sometimes you want to press that button and talk to a human. Are we getting overexcited about the ability to send data when we need to be remembering that voice perhaps should be at the core of this?
I don't think I describe any of our users as being overexcited about data, frankly. But there's some difference in there. Those of you who are listening, who are from a fire ambulance background, will know already that 70, 80, 90% of your deployments are data-driven anyway. So that allows you to do that work on this network. For policing is much more voice-dependent, which is why I said you will get critical voice. That meets your needs. They may need them in a slightly more modern way, bearing in mind we'll be dealing with an application that's being coded now, as opposed to an application that was coded in the late 90s. So there's going to be some differences there that we will work through. But use of data is something that policing is already doing. And there are probably two strands to this. The first is that it won't be on a network, whoever your provider is, it won't be on a network as big as ESN, so it means you won't get that data capability in some of the more wilder places where ESN is working. One of the biggest challenges, I think, is to think for policing about how it will work over the next 10, 15, 20 years. Look at proper digitization of processes, proper robotics, use of AI and deployment. It's frankly inconceivable to me that policing would not be exploiting some of that and going more data-driven, not to the exclusion of voice, but as an addition, and using smart technology, the small s, but smart technology in control rooms to start looking at better deployment and moving resources. So I think that there is going to be a growing demand for data. The final piece on that goes back to another sort of previous involvement of mine in policing, and that's major incidents. And you look back on all the big major incidents inquiries over the last 20, 30, or in my case, 40 years, and they talk about communications, all the way from King's Cross Fire to Grenfell 2. And one of the biggest quotes that stuck with me as I read the reports was from Grenfell 1, and there's a fire officer, one of the first people on the scene of that awful incident, and his comment to the inquiry was, we were using communications from the dark ages. And I can't carry on allowing people to put themselves at risk or the public at risk without fixing that or creating the capability for people to fix it. And people say, we've already got data. And I'll say, yeah, but you can't talk to fire with it. And fire can't talk to you. And you can't swap video. And one of the examples that I use is the worst kind of example. Just supposing a child is snatched off the street or doesn't make it home. That picture could be inside a police control room within, 10 minutes, 15 minutes? Well, what about sending that picture out to every single ESN device within 100 miles? So firefighters, paramedics, district nurses, anyone who's got one of these devices will get this pop-up as an alert saying, look at this child, border force, people trying to take a child out of the country. Now, that's not the main aim, and certainly wasn't the main aim at the start of ESN. And it isn't the main aim now. The main aim is to replace the critical voice network. But it would be wrong of me not to make some of these points gently to the point of, when you trust the network, when you trust the devices, and we start to get rollout, let's start thinking a little bit more about exploiting today's technology as it evolves over the next 10, 15, 20 years so that data actually becomes something that keeps people safe as opposed to just chucking information left and right.
You talked about those major incidents there. These systems are often designed with the everyday use in mind. We don't consider the exceptional cases. I remember policing the G8 summit in Gleneagles, and I remember at the time we were told not to use our point-to-point on airwave because the system was already stretched. At the same time, for those of you old enough to remember, the 7/7 attacks happened during that period. That put even more strain on the system. Is ESN able to cope with a Grenfell, a 7/7, a major fire, an industrial disaster?
So we are already checking those. So we have had ESN out at a number of things. I think they were even at Reading Festival, which struck me as being an interesting test, bearing in mind the age range of the people who were out there. But we were at the G8 recently down in Cornwall, or sorry, Heads of Government meeting. We have been at, we were at the funeral of the late Queen, we were at the coronation, and we've also been at Notting Hill Carnival. So we now know a lot more about the capacity of the network, how the different cell sites perform under stress, and we also know that the difference between pre-planned and spontaneous is how quickly can our network provider respond to provide that extra capability, and we are working on that. One of the things about the system is something called priority and preemption, and if you are an EE customer and you happen to be the misfortune of being near to one of these events, you might find yourself thrown off the network because you'll get thrown off to ensure that blue light colleagues can actually make those calls. So we haven't finished that testing yet. The field testing will go on, and it will continue to go on until we're satisfied that anything that is realistically of a scale that we're talking about, such as a 7/7 or a Grenfell or a Manchester Arena, we tested it and we know how we will respond and how the network will respond.
When it comes to sending data to all these devices out there amongst all these personnel, how can you ensure that the network is secure from hackers, people who don't have the country's best interests at heart?
So again, it's another big part of the program. We have a huge security team. We have a CISO. We work with NCSC in terms of making sure that the network itself is protected. We work to their standards in terms of looking at the data centers. So it'll be about as protected as it could be. And I might gently argue is probably better protected than your standard commercial network, which people are using for data now. He said very carefully, try not to upset anyone.
We'll come to questions shortly. Very briefly, if you can, what are some of the challenges ahead for you and your team?
Knowing where to start in that one, that's it's a difficult question. We're still getting through the final stages of procurements. We were ready to roll, we thought, through with the last pieces of the two big procurements to get the main suppliers and the consortia that are going to deal with all of this. We had 4 different scenarios of when a general election might be. Didn't have July on our list. So that has changed things slightly. It's not a bad thing, it's not a good thing. It has just changed some of the timings, and we're still working through with ministers on that. So getting to that final piece is going to be a very significant bit of work over the next few weeks. Once we've done that, there's a whole new set of challenges. We will have suppliers, because however this is configured, there is always going to be more than one supplier in the chain. There will be a number of people supplying devices, people supplying various pieces of it. We need to integrate that, not just technically, but in terms of a one-team approach in the program, so that we can actually all look and focus on what we're trying to get done. And then there's just a massive logistical challenge. We've got 120 odd control rooms, as I said, probably 400,000, that'd be nice, 400,000 SIM cards to get out, to get provisioned, HR systems working, connected into the databases. Those, however, are they're the nice problems to have. People know how to do that. So I'm looking forward to not spending a lot of our time wrestling with getting the program set on a commercial framework with our suppliers, whoever that might be, going forward, and actually getting stuck into that delivery, because we then have work to do to build trust with users. As I said, many users will have heard about the program a while ago, haven't heard for 10 years, so we need to bring it to life so that people start to get interested, understand, and we can start to do the planning.
Thank you. So I run a private event healthcare organisation. So our role is obviously to be at events. Reading Festival used as an example, but obviously there's everything from small to large. We have a business contract with EE at the moment, and obviously you highlighted a huge risk to our organisation and that we could potentially be thrown off the network if there's any kind of significant incident in the general vicinity. So for me, how do I sort of ensure that if I need to speak to the ambulance service control room or even my off-site resources, or I need to send a WhatsApp to immediately inform my teams of something that I don't really want to put over on voice, how do I make sure I can still do that and deliver a safe level of service to event goers? And then sort of off the back of that, there has been in the past ways of borrowing airwave handsets, for example. Is there still going to be something similar for ESN for organisations working at larger events and venues for that improved interoperability and communication?
Great, thank you. So the first part of that, are we jeopardising these vital partner agencies we work with?
So you've partly answered your first question with your second point, actually, because that was where I was going to go. Two things. Firstly, getting thrown off the network doesn't mean forever. It might mean that particular call, so you can have another turn, and you can sort of get back on, because the network capacity is still pretty good. It is just a question if it ever actually reached the point where it was dangerous, that priority and preemption would kick in. Funny enough, we were talking about this point genuinely yesterday about organisations that don't have a contract with Airwave, don't have handsets, and there are probably thousands of handsets that have been sort of lent, by police forces or ambulances or to community groups, to various people. And as far as I am concerned, if your local ambulance trust procures devices and they can give them to you and give you a call sign, I'm absolutely relaxed with that. That's absolutely fine. I don't see that there would be a problem with that whatsoever, because it would be the same approach in effect to airwave devices, that if they've decided you need them, I don't have any problem at all with you actually having access to them, because by deciding you need them, they've said you're part of this ecosystem that is keeping the public safe. So contractually, it would be done probably very similarly to the way Airwave is done now, is that people might say, here's 5 handsets, which may not be contractually at all, but works.
What are the challenges with Airwave now that ESN is looking to resolve?
I think simply that the technology itself has proven to be very expensive, and it is also static. It hasn't moved. We refer to it as being sort of 2G technology. It's been around for a very long time. It's not progressing, and it has a limit to what you can do with it. As a voice system, it is extremely reliable. Make no bones about that. There are no flaws in it. There's nothing to suggest that it is putting anyone's sort of life at risk. But there is a general sense from sort of independent experts, sort of both around the world, but also in the UK, that over time the system itself could degrade, which might make it more challenging. Now, as I said, there's no evidence of that at the moment, and I've no doubt that Airwave is sustainable, but would be extremely expensive as well to maintain some of the hardware in that.
Ken Harris, Met Police. You mentioned the devices catalogue. One thing that I didn't hear was an off-network capability. Is that still in the programme?
That is something that it's not there at the moment, but it is being looked at around the world. I'm sorry, just in case, I don't know if anybody here was the off-network, so it's kind of like put the device-to-device capability. It's not there at the moment. We are very much aware of it as a need, and it is being looked at around the world, and everyone is wrestling with this. We don't believe it's insoluble, and it does form part of the requirements. Will need to be fixed before we start to firmly roll it out.
Okay, we know that we've got the naturally built environment, lakes, valleys, rural areas. One of the things that's well known with telephony now is that the built environment, which is coming on as they're replacing the buildings, cladding them, basically turning them into huge, great Faraday cages. I've been involved in some of the testing in some of these buildings. You can be stood outside, perfect signal, 6 foot inside, it's dead as a doornail. How are we going to be dealing with that? And some of these are very large structures.
Yes, so we have a list from our users of thousands of locations where you absolutely have to guarantee that you have coverage, and we're looking at how we provide coverage in some of those big buildings. But we are aware of that building penetration challenge, and it's true, it does exist. We're working with colleagues around the world as well. There are probably another 9 or 10 governments around the world who are all big government bodies who are looking at this to try and find solutions that are economically viable but also don't put people's lives at risk. But it is a known issue, and you're right to raise it, and it's one we're very cited on. Where you get things such as big sports stadia, for example, down in the bowels of those, we have contacts with the kind of the equivalent body rolling out their similar network in France, and we're giving them some time to sort of dust off a bit after the Olympics and Paralympics, and we'll be speaking to them to find out what they found, any challenges, and what the fixes were for that.
Hello. Airwave is highly power resilient, so it will, if the base station sites in particular will stay online for days in the event of a widespread power cut. How will ESN compare? Will it be comparable or will it be different?
It will be comparable in terms of resilience. The national target for sort of big bits of infrastructure like this is 5 days. We're working to ensure that. Some of the challenges around power outages are very localised. One of the differences between a commercial network and a Tetra network is the Tetra network, each cell site covers a larger area. So if you lose one of the aerials, masts, you lose coverage over a bigger area. One of the benefits of a commercial network is if you lose just 1 or 2 sites, it's not so far to a nearest site. So we're looking very closely at the mapping that overlap, but building in various different types of power resilience generators. We're looking, I believe, at solar power actually as well, in case, despite what we might think, there is enough energy out there to store batteries, but a lot of it is going to be generators and the similar sorts of things that we use currently with Airwave. But again, you won't be surprised to hear that it is a big piece of the requirements from our user community. Particularly those in some of the more rural parts of sort of Wales, Northern England, Scotland, where severe weather is perhaps slightly more prevalent and causes more problems with coverage now and is likely to in the future in terms of some of the storms that we're getting.
Interesting to hear your ideas about how we can use the data service for things like child and amber alerts. We can kind of do that stuff today. We've got the ambulance service through Good Sam dispatching our responders to cardiac arrests. So why do we need ESN to do that? And I guess to follow up on that, how's the programme going to ensure that 3 blue light services all do work together to use this technology to the best of the public money that's been put into it?
Okay, so one of the reasons, again, using ESN is just that it will be a better network. It's more places, it'll be more resilient and it'll be more reliable, and everyone is on it, as opposed to being on separate data networks. In terms of the last question, this programme's big enough as it is, frankly, for me, rather than trying to sort of get better use out of blue light organisations. What we can do, what we will do, is make suggestions, but this is very much for the blue light organisations to choose how and when they exploit. We have some ideas, but we're there to build the network and replace it. As I say, we have some thoughts, but there are far more brains than mine sitting in ambulance, fire and policing over the country that will be chatting about this. I mean, I have had some conversations with the Jessup, which is the sort of for those multi-agency teams looking for the blue light services about how they might want to use this. And I've started talking to policing as well about how some of this might be exploited over the next 5 to 10 years. But that's as much a personal interest as a programme one. We'll provide you with critical voice, we'll make it resilient, we'll make sure it works, and we will give you a data bearer that will be better than any other single data bearer. But frankly, I don't think it's for the programme to start to instruct people how to use it.
Simon, you have the unenviable task of having to deal with politicians, as you said earlier. There's been a new wave of politicians coming in recently, new ministers, new government. How's that affecting the future of the emergency services network?
I don't think it's actually going to affect the future. There's been a sort of a hiccup, but only in timing at this point. As you would expect, a new government, one that is not sort of returned to power, but has been in opposition for 14 years. There are a number of ministers who've not been in government before, even if they've been in Parliament for a while. So they are feeling their way in. We've all heard what the Chancellor has said about public finances. So there is a great deal of caution in terms of spend. But we are going through with sort of support, and I'm sure we'll get through the next couple of weeks, testing though they will be prior to the spending review. So I'm not expecting there to be a challenge. There is just simply difference, and that's not a criticism or a comment. So please don't infer anything other than these are new politicians, new people in positions of authority in the Home Office and Treasury, and we haven't worked with them. So there is an element of them sort of getting more information, learning more about the programme. Particularly when you have a Home Secretary who was previously chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, where the programme has been commented on, shall I say, in the past. There is an element of rebalancing some of that information about where the program is now as opposed to where it might have been 8 or 9 years ago.
Any questions for Simon? Please do raise your hand. We'll bring a microphone to you. Simon, you mentioned earlier on that you want this to be as smooth as possible a transition for the end user. You want there to be as little change as possible. You also mentioned CAD systems and control rooms, and arguably that's the tougher end because they're the people sending this data out. The end user is just on the receiving end. Is it much harder to do the front end of the control rooms?
I think it's different. The people who work in control rooms, by definition, are familiar with using complex technology, but they will also have, in their own brains, default settings that when they want to do something, their hands will move almost without thinking, and their feet will move if they got sort of foot-activated, speaking or in their ICSs. So we will spend quite a lot of time with users, not just when we've built it and rolled out, but we will bring users into the program. So one of my requests, and apologies if I use kind of police terminology, because I don't know what the name is in fire ambulance, but running a police control room at any one point will be almost certainly an inspector who will be called an Ops 1 or an Operation 1. There will be an equivalent in fire and ambulance, where we are determined to bring those people into the program. So as we build the solution, they'll say, well, that can't work. So that will be user informed. It can't be user driven, user led all the way, but it can certainly be user informed to the point where if I've got an ops inspector who's been working in a control room for 5 years, or the equivalent from fire and the equivalent from ambulance, who come in and say, don't take that 2-stage business process and tell me you've delivered it now in 17 stages and I've now got 17 things to do. That's unacceptable, and it is. So one of the ways is bring the users in so that as you build it and as you develop it and as it evolves, the users themselves understand how it's going to work. And by definition, it should then be easier when we roll out what will be quite a lengthy and complex initially familiarisation and then later training programme, which is a part of this for all the users in the UK.
What's next? What should people be looking out for?
So we've been fairly quiet about the programme over the last few years, probably understandably, in terms of, here they go again, they're talking about it. The programme has walked people up the hill about 3 times and then walked them down again. We will have suppliers who are motivated, determined to deliver. We have a user community at the senior level who are incredibly supportive. So that means we'll start talking to you more. We will be coming out. We will be doing some explanation. My intention at some point next year is to get hundreds, if not thousands, of devices out there. They won't be the final ones. They won't necessarily be the ones that you deal with, but they will be out there to give people a sense, just to build some knowledge, build some understanding, some familiarisation. They'll have a version of whatever the MCX app is. It won't be the final one. We'll send it out, undersell it, saying they're not the great devices, the app's not finished, but start to learn and think about the future. And that will build, hopefully, a bit of a noise, and we'll start to talk with users at the ground level who are going to be using these things for 10, 15, 20 years. We can then learn. So that if we say, well, you thought that was a good idea in the program, but you're completely missing the point about the device or about the way the app works or about the color scheme or the size of the screen on the device that we procure, whatever it is, I want to hear that from people, and I'll say it again and I will keep saying it. I want to hear it from people who are going to be using it at 3 o'clock in the morning, in the rain, in the dark, wearing gloves. And those are the people I need to get to understand that what I'm building with my team is what they're going to use.
Just to wrap us up, Airwave has done its job for 2 decades. In your designing of the ESN, have you given it a lifespan?
Not at this point, no. I refuse to be given a date by which to finish a program of this importance. We know roughly when we think we will start transition. It might be quicker depending on how smoothly it goes. It might take a little bit longer if there are hiccups. And let's be honest, in a program like this, and particularly this one, there's likely to be a hiccup somewhere because something of this complexity, no matter how hard we work, we're all going to look back and say, why didn't we think of that? Hopefully that will only be something small, and it'll need fixing, but we'll fix it. So no, I have no idea yet exactly when Airwave will be turned off. I've got a target in my mind, and I'm not going to tell anyone what it is outside of the program because somebody will quote me on it in about 2 years' time, and I will say the word target and they'll just have ignored that bit.
And then with ESN itself, have you said we want ESN to be doing its job for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years?
It's impossible to know how long ESN will work for because it is going to be on the back of commercial network. So whatever technology we'll use will evolve. So we will evolve and develop 5G capability where it's appropriate. People talk about 6G. I've been chatting to people in the market. Nobody knows what 6G is. It might be really interesting. It might just be a software tweak. We'll see about that. The principle about this is that it will evolve. It will get better. It will do whatever the market allows it to do, as long as we keep sticking to the requirements that the users get what they need to do what they need to do.
Very interesting. Simon, thank you very much. Thank you for your company. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
That's good. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you like this session, then be sure to browse the rest of the programme for the show. Share the link and subscribe to receive updates on new content from us here at Emergency Services Times.